Welcome back to another deep dive into Fallout's darkest corners. Today's story isn't about vaults or super mutants, it's about something far more disturbing, something that actually happened in our own history and was amplified into nightmare in the Fallout universe. This is the true story of Little Yangtze, America's forgotten concentration camp, and the prisoners who became permanent test subjects for technologies that would haunt the wasteland for centuries. Let's descend into this horror together. They told me the collar was temporary. They told me a lot of things during processing, but I remember that lie most clearly because I believed it. Prisoner number 0127, they stamped on my file. Not my name anymore, just 3 digits and a piece of metal locked around my throat that would paint the ground with my skull fragments if I stepped wrong. My crime? Speaking Mandarin to my mother at the grocery store 2 blocks from my apartment in San Francisco. A military policeman heard us, decided we sounded suspicious, filed a report. 3 days later, soldiers dragged me from my bed at 4 in the morning. They gave me 60 seconds to get dressed. My citizenship papers were still sitting on the kitchen table when they shoved me into the transport truck. Executive Order 99066, they called it. For our protection, the poster said, for national security during the Sino-American War. I watched them load my entire neighborhood into those trucks, families torn apart, children crying for parents, old men who'd lived in America for 50 years suddenly reclassified as enemy combatants. The soldiers wouldn't look us in the eyes. I think they knew what they were doing was wrong, but orders are orders, and conscience doesn't stop a paycheck. The train ride took 3 days. We were packed into cargo cars like livestock, no windows, 1 bucket in the corner for waste, and guards with nightsticks who seemed to enjoy demonstrating that we no longer had rights. They fed us once a day, threw bags of stale bread through the door like we were animals in a zoo. Anyone who complained got the nightstick. Anyone who cried got the nightstick. Anyone who asked questions got the nightstick. We learned silence fast. When the train finally stopped, they marched us out into the desert sun. I didn't recognize the landscape, didn't know where in America they'd brought us. All I saw was wire fence stretching in every direction, guard towers with searchlights, and a sign that read, Little Yangtze Detention Facility. They'd named it after the biggest river in China, like that was supposed to be funny. Like we were supposed to appreciate the irony. The camp commandant explained the rules in English, speaking slowly like we were children. Most of us understood every word perfectly. We'd grown up in America. We were Americans, but he didn't care. You will follow orders. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will wear your identification collar at all times. Removal of the collar will result in immediate termination. That's what he said, termination, like we were computer programs instead of human beings. Then he pointed to the fence line where 3 bodies still hung from the previous day's escape attempt. The collars had turned their heads into red mist. The fence is electrified. The collars are coded to the boundary. Cross it and you won't feel a thing. The detonation is instantaneous. Consider it mercy. They shoved us into tents. 40 people crammed into spaces designed for 20, metal bunks with thin mattresses that smelled like mold and previous occupants who hadn't left voluntarily. The first night, I met prisoner 0034, an old man from Sacramento who'd been arrested for writing letters to his cousin in Beijing. He told me the truth about Little Yangtze, whispered it after the guards finished their rounds and the searchlights swept past our tent. This isn't a detention center, he said, voice shaking. It's a shopping mart. They're storing us here until the scientists need fresh specimens. You see those medical tents on the north side? People go in for routine checkups. Half of them never come out. The ones who do come back changed, broken. Talking about men in white coats who measured their brains, took samples, asked them questions while injecting chemicals into their spines. I didn't believe him. I couldn't believe him. America didn't do things like that, not to its own citizens, not even during wartime. But then the first midnight abduction happened, and I learned that my country had no limits to what it would do in the name of science and security. They came for prisoner 0289 on my 3rd night. She was sleeping in the bunk next to mine, a young woman from Los Angeles, barely 20 years old, arrested because her father had been born in Shanghai. The medical staff didn't even try to be quiet. They just walked in with flashlights, grabbed her, and dragged her out while she screamed. The guards stood outside the tent, nightsticks ready, daring any of us to protest. We sat in our bunks, frozen, listening to her cries fade into the distance. She never came back. Her bunk stayed empty. They didn't even bother removing her blanket. The next morning, I asked one of the guards what happened to her. He smiled, actually smiled, and said, "She's contributing to national defense research. You should be proud. We're protecting you from the communists by understanding how communist biology works." Then, he hit me with the nightstick hard enough to crack a rib, told me 3 weeks of solitary confinement would teach me not to ask questions. Solitary was a concrete box, 6 feet by 6 feet, no windows, a hole in the floor for waste. They fed me every 3 days, just enough to keep me alive. The screaming was louder in solitary. I could hear it through the walls, coming from the medical complex next door. People begging, people sobbing, people making sounds I didn't think human throats could produce. Sometimes I heard drills, sometimes I heard saw blades, sometimes I heard voices reciting numbers, clinical and detached, like they were discussing car parts instead of people. When they finally let me out, I'd lost 15 pounds and most of my sanity. Prisoner 0034 was gone. They'd taken him while I was locked away. His bunk had a new occupant, a teenager from Portland who wouldn't stop shaking. "They took my brother," she whispered that first night. "We came in together. They separated us at processing. I saw him yesterday through the fence. He was walking toward the medical tents. He was walking, but his eyes were empty, like he was still alive but nobody was home anymore." I started noticing the patterns after that. The scientists came every Tuesday and Friday, always at midnight, always in groups of 3. They had clipboards and flashlights and needles. They'd walk through the camp selecting prisoners like produce at a market, pointing at faces, checking numbers against their lists, marking us with red tags that meant we'd been chosen for something. The guards called it volunteering for research. None of us volunteered. None of us had a choice. Dr. Boris was the worst of them. I saw him twice, both times from a distance, both times close enough to understand what kind of man he was. Tall, thin, gray hair, white lab coat, always pristine despite the desert dust. He walked through Little Yangtze like he owned us. Because he did. We were his specimens, his test subjects, his raw materials for whatever experiments the big mountain facility needed. I heard the guards talking about him once, saying he ran something called the Biomechanical Research Division. They laughed about his cyberdog projects, about how many prisoners he'd gone through trying to perfect the K-9000 weapon system. They laughed, like dead people were funny. I watched him select prisoner 073 for a routine medical evaluation. She was gone for 6 hours. When they brought her back, she couldn't speak. Her jaw was wired shut, her eyes were dilated, and there were fresh scars running along her spine. She died 3 days later. The official report said natural causes. We knew better. We always knew better. The trauma override harnesses started appearing around month 4 of my imprisonment. They called them Y-17 medical evacuation suits, described them as revolutionary battlefield medicine. Automatic casualty retrieval, they said. Smart fibers that would carry wounded soldiers back to base even if the soldier was unconscious. I watched them test the prototypes on prisoner 098, sealed him inside a red rubber suit with a glass helmet, told him to walk around the testing ground. Everything seemed fine until he collapsed from heat stroke. The suit kept walking, his body slumped inside like a puppet with cut strings, but the suit didn't stop. It kept walking, kept moving, following. Its programming to return to home base, except nobody had programmed a home base, so it just wandered. For 3 days that suit wandered the camp with his corpse inside, until finally the scientists sedated it, cut it open, and pulled out what remained. They improved the design based on his data. His death made the harnesses better. That's what the report said. His sacrifice advanced the field of combat medicine. They tested 6 more harnesses after that, 6 more prisoners sealed inside walking coffins that couldn't tell if their users were alive or dead. All 6 died inside the suits. All 6 suits kept functioning, kept walking, kept following protocols even with corpses rattling around inside. The scientists were thrilled. They'd created the perfect soldier, one who didn't quit just because of inconvenient things like death. I realized then that we weren't research subjects, we were blueprints. Every experiment they ran on us, every collar they fitted, every suit they tested, it was all preparation for mass production. They were designing control systems for entire populations. We were just the prototype phase. If you're still with me after hearing this, hit that like and subscribe button. I need to know someone's listening. I need to know someone remembers what happened here because I'm not sure how much longer I can. The collar training began in month 6. That's what they called it. Training, like we were dogs learning tricks. Total pacification protocols, the technical term from the manuals I glimpsed when guards left paperwork on tables. The collars we wore weren't just boundary enforcement anymore. They'd been upgraded, modified, turned into something far more sophisticated than simple explosive devices. They could shock us now. Different frequencies, different intensities, punishment calibrated to the perceived severity of our infractions. Speak out of turn, 5-second shock. Move too slowly during count, 10-second shock. Make eye contact with a scientist, 15 seconds at maximum voltage. I watched prisoner 147 seize so hard during a 20-second punishment that he bit through his own tongue. They let him bleed for an hour before taking him to medical. He came back 3 days later with the tongue removed entirely. The report said voluntary amputation to prevent future injury. None of us were fooled. But the shocks weren't the worst part. The worst part was realizing they were gathering data. Every collar transmitted constantly, sending information back to the Big Mountain research computers. Heart rate, stress levels, pain response, obedience metrics. They were building profiles on us, learning exactly how much suffering it took to break human will. I found out later they called it the total pacification threshold study. How much pain does it take to make a person stop being a person and start being a tool? We were answering that question every single day. General Wellesley visited once. I never saw his face, but I heard his voice over the camp speakers during an inspection tour. Deep, authoritative, completely devoid of empathy. He congratulated the camp commandant on maintaining order, praised the efficiency of the collar system, asked about transfer numbers to Big Mountain. Commander Devlin sends his regards, Wellesley said. The political protesters from Hopeville have been extremely useful. The think tank specifically requested more subjects with higher education backgrounds. Apparently, educated prisoners provide better baseline data for the cognitive research projects. That's when I understood the full scope of what they were doing. Little Yangtze wasn't just accepting random Chinese Americans rounded up for looking suspicious. They were specifically targeting educated people, activists, anyone who might resist or question authority. Commander Devlin in Hopeville was arresting political protesters and shipping them here under the guise of detention. We were political prisoners being used as human guinea pigs for experiments that would eventually be used to control entire populations. The collars, the pacification systems, the data collection, all of it was designed to perfect the technology of oppression. I met prisoner 027 in month 8. She'd been here longer than me, almost 2 years, survived more experiments than anyone else in the camp. We called her the ghost because she moved like one, silent and careful, always watching the guards, always calculating. She taught me the real rules of Little Yangtze, the ones they didn't announce over speakers. Never volunteer for anything, she whispered during evening count. Medical evaluation, work detail, special assignment, all traps. They take you to Big Mountain proper, to the research domes, and you don't come back the same. I've seen people return without memories, without personalities, just empty shells following commands. They're perfecting something called the Robo-Brain Protocol. taking human brains, putting them in machines, seeing if consciousness survives the transfer. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. But the brains keep functioning, keep processing, keep serving. That's all they want. Obedient processing power. She showed me her scars one night, lifted her shirt to reveal a spine that looked more metal than bone. They took 3 vertebrae, she said, replaced them with prototype spinal interface hardware, said they were testing neural bridge technology for paralysis patients. I heard them talking while I was sedated. They weren't helping anyone. They were building control systems. Direct spinal interface means direct motor control. Imagine entire armies with these implants. Officers could override soldier movements, force compliance, eliminate cowardice by eliminating choice. That's what we are. We're the proof of concept. I started keeping track after that conversation, started counting how many prisoners disappeared and how many came back. The numbers were horrifying. For every 10 people taken to Big Mountain, maybe 3 returned. And those 3 were never the same. They'd flinch at unexpected sounds, refuse to speak about what happened, stare at the fence line like they were calculating whether instant death was better than another day of existence. Prisoner 099 tried to escape in month 9. His collar detonated exactly as promised, but before he died, he was smiling. I think he counted it as a victory. The cloud project files got delivered to Little Yangtze by mistake in month 11. Some administrative error meant a courier dropped a box of classified documents at the camp office instead of the medical research building. I was on cleaning detail that day, saw the papers scattered across the commandant's desk before he realized the error. I only caught glimpses, only read fragments, but those fragments told me everything I needed to know about the future they were building. Z43 Innovative Toxins Plant has successfully synthesized crowd control agent designation Cloud. One memo read, "Initial tests show promise for area denial applications, requesting human subjects for exposure trials. Recommend Little Yangtze population for Phase 1 testing, given existing containment infrastructure and expendable status of prisoners." Expendable status. That's what we were. Not detained, not imprisoned. Expendable. Resources to be used up in the name of scientific progress. The cloud they mentioned, I learned later, was being developed for a place called the Sierra Madre, some luxury casino that Big Mountain was using as a testing ground for experimental technologies. They needed to know how the cloud affected human biology, how long exposure took to kill, whether survivors could be controlled or weaponized. We were going to be the test subjects. They were going to gas us like rats in a lab. The ventilation accident happened before they could implement the cloud tests. Month 12, the camp's air circulation system malfunctioned, started pumping chemical fumes into the northern tents. 30 people died before they shut it down. The scientists were furious. Not because people had died, but because the deaths were uncontrolled, unmonitored, useless for research purposes. They actually complained in their reports that the malfunction had wasted valuable test subjects. I read those reports during a later cleaning assignment. Accidental exposure yields no usable data. Future toxin releases must be controlled and observed to justify resource expenditure. We weren't even people in their paperwork. We were resource expenditure, but that malfunction gave them ideas. I heard them discussing it through the medical tent walls while I was waiting for my monthly health screening. They were excited. The accidental gas release had shown them something important. They could test atmospheric weapons on contained populations without anyone outside the camp knowing. Little Yangtze was isolated, classified, surrounded by desert, perfect laboratory conditions. They started planning Phase 1 of the hazmat suit trials, preparing to deliberately release toxins so they could study how different protective equipment performed. The hazmat suits arrived in month 14, Big Mountain prototype designation, Sierra Madre worker, protection suits, bulky, difficult to move in, sealed completely except for cowl-like respirators that made speech nearly impossible. They told us the suits would protect us from future ventilation malfunctions. They were lying. The suits were another experiment. They wanted to see how people functioned in complete isolation, how communication broke down, whether sealed environments created psychological stress that could be weaponized. They made us wear the suits during work details, monitored our efficiency, measured our stress hormones, documented everything. Prisoner 163 suffocated in her suit during week 2 of the trials. The respirator clogged, the seal prevented her from removing the helmet, and she died over the course of 8 minutes while the scientists watched through observation windows and took notes. They improved the respirator design based on her data. Her death made the suits better, just like all our deaths made something better. That was our purpose. That was our only purpose, to die in ways that generated useful information. I tried to remember my name during month 15, tried to hold on to the person I'd been before they assigned me a number. But the memories were fading, the shocks, the experiments, the constant fear, all of it was eroding my sense of self. I was becoming 0127, just a designation, just a data point in someone's research. That's what they wanted. That's what the callers were designed to do. Break us down until we stopped resisting, stopped hoping, stopped being anything except obedient research material. Then, October 23rd, 2077 happened. The day the bombs fell. The day the world ended. The day Little Yangtze became our permanent tomb. I was in the recreation yard when the first flash lit up the western horizon. Thought it was lightning at first. Then the second flash came, and the third, and the guards started running, shouting into radios, trying to contact command. The sirens started 20 minutes later. Then the ground shook. Then the sky turned orange. Then we understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong, that the war everyone feared had finally arrived, that the nuclear exchange had begun. The military evacuated. That's the polite way to say they abandoned us. Officers, guards, even the camp commandant, they all ran for the transport trucks and fled toward whatever bunkers or shelters they thought might save them. They left us locked in our tents with our collars still active, the fence still electrified, no way to escape, no protection from what was coming. I watched them go from the yard, watched them drive away, watched them leave. Us to die without even the mercy of a bullet. We were expendable, remember? Not worth saving, not worth the transport space, not worth the effort. The fallout started 3 hours later. We couldn't see it, couldn't smell it, couldn't taste it. We just felt it. The radiation sickness began within a day. Nausea, weakness, skin lesions. Some people died fast, some people died slow, some people didn't die at all. Those were the ones who had it worst. The transformation took weeks. Our skin started changing, turning leathery, losing pigmentation. Our hair fell out, our voices roughened. We were becoming something else, something that could survive radiation that should have killed us. Ghouls, we eventually learned the term, ghoulification, the process of radiation mutating human tissue into something resilient and horrible and immortal. But the collars still worked. That's the thing nobody talks about. The bombs destroyed civilization, killed billions, ended the world, but our collars kept functioning perfectly. 200 years of exposure to radiation, weather, time, and those big mountain engineering masterpieces just kept ticking. We couldn't leave. We couldn't die. We could only stay here, locked in this camp, prisoners of technology that outlasted the country that created it. If this story has kept you listening this far and you want more of these dark confessions from the wasteland, hit that like button. It really motivates me to create similar Fallout lores, because what comes next, what I became, what this place turned into, that's when the real horror began. 204 years. That's how long I've been prisoner 0127. That's how long I've been dead but still walking. That's how long this collar has been around my neck, humming its quiet threat, reminding me every second that I'm still property of a government that doesn't exist anymore. The other survivors and I, we don't talk much. Hard to talk when you've spent 2 centuries watching your fellow prisoners lose their minds one by one. Ghoulification preserved our bodies, but it couldn't protect our sanity. Some went feral within the first decade. their minds decaying while their bodies stayed immortal. They'd attack anything that moved, driven by instincts they couldn't control. The collars would detonate them when they got too close to the fence. I'd hear the explosions at night, sharp cracks in the darkness, another mind finally released from its prison. We learned to survive on rats and insects, whatever crawled through the fence line. The supplies ran out within months of the bombs falling. The water system failed after 5 years. We dug wells with our bare hands, filtered radiation through layers of sand and cloth, drank liquid that probably should have killed us but somehow didn't. Ghouls are hard to kill. That's the blessing and the curse. We endure when we should be allowed to die. The camp degraded around us. The tents rotted away by year 20. The guard towers collapsed by year 50. The administration building crumbled to rubble by year 70. But the fence stayed up. The collars stayed active. Big Mountain's engineering was built to last, and last it did. Those scientists who experimented on us, who turned us into research subjects, they'd built our cage so well that even the apocalypse couldn't break it. I watched Prisoner 0034 go feral in year 38. He'd been my friend, the old man who warned me about the medical experiments on my first night. We'd survived together, scrounged together, kept each other sane through shared memories of the world before. Then, one morning I woke up and he was gone. Not gone from the camp, gone from himself. His eyes were empty, his movements were jerky, and when he looked at me, he didn't see a person. He saw prey. I had to avoid him for the next 100 years until his collar finally detonated when he charged a lobotomite that wandered too close to the fence. I didn't cry. I'd forgotten how. The lobotomites started appearing around year 115. We didn't know what they were at first. People shaped things in hospital gowns, wandering the Big Mountain crater, making strange sounds, attacking anything that moved. Later, I learned they were failed experiments from the think tank, prisoners like us who'd been taken for brain surgery and come back as something less than human. They were us, just a different version. Another way, Big Mountain had learned to break people down into components. The trauma harnesses still walk. That's the worst part. The Y-17 units from before the war, the ones with corpses sealed inside, they're still out there, still following their programming, still wandering Big Mountain looking for a home base that was destroyed 2 centuries ago. Sometimes I see them through the fence, red suits moving with jerky precision, glass helmets showing skulls that should have turned to dust generations ago. The suits won't let them rest, won't let them decay, won't let them stop. They're us too, in a way, prisoners of technology that works too well. I found prisoner 027's body in year 143. She'd hanged herself using strips torn from her clothing, looped around a support beam in what used to be the medical tent. The collar had detonated when she'd kicked the stool away, but somehow she'd rigged it so the explosion happened after she was already dead. Even in suicide, she'd been calculating, clever, refusing to give them the satisfaction of controlling her death. I buried her in one of the mass graves we dug over the decades, added her to the hundreds of others who'd found their own ways out. The years blurred together after that. 1 century bled into the next. The sun rose and set. The seasons changed. The camp stayed the same. I forgot what hope felt like. I forgot what freedom meant. I forgot everything except the weight of the collar and the endless empty days of survival without purpose. Then, in 2281, someone new came to Big Mountain. Someone who understood the collars. Someone who saw us not as victims but as tools. His name was Elijah. Father Elijah, he called himself, though there was nothing paternal about him. Former Brotherhood of Steel elder, I learned later. Disgraced, angry, searching for weapons to exact revenge on the new California Republic. He'd come to Big Mountain looking for technology, found the think tank's research archives, and discovered something that excited him more than any laser weapon. He'd discovered us. He'd discovered the collars. He'd discovered that Little Yangtze contained the perfect testing ground for the theories he'd been developing. I saw him for the first time when he came to the camp, tall, older, wearing Brotherhood robes, carrying equipment I didn't recognize. He didn't speak to us, didn't acknowledge our existence as people, just walked through Little Yangtze examining the collars, taking readings, muttering to himself about frequencies and detonation protocols. He set up a workshop in the watchtower, spent days analyzing the collar technology, cracking the codes that had kept us imprisoned for 2 centuries. We thought he might free us. We were idiots. We were desperate. We wanted so badly to believe that someone had finally come to end our suffering that we ignored all the warning signs. Elijah didn't want to free us. He wanted to understand how to control us better. The testing began within a week. He'd figured out the collar frequencies, learned how to activate them remotely, discovered he could detonate us one by one or all at once depending on the signal he transmitted. He practiced on prisoner 118 first, just walked up to the fence, pressed the button on his device, and 118's head exploded, tested the range next, detonated prisoner 091 from 50 meters away, then 100 meters, then 200, perfecting his understanding, using us as training dummies for technology he planned to employ somewhere else. The other prisoners started avoiding me. I don't blame them. I was 0127, unlucky enough to be in his line of sight when he decided he needed more data. He grabbed me one morning, dragged me to the watchtower, strapped me to a chair, and started running diagnostics on my collar while I sat there, unable to move, unable to resist, unable to do anything except provide the information he needed. "Fascinating," he muttered while his equipment beeped and hummed. 200 plus years of continuous operation. The think tank really outdid themselves with these. The Sierra Madre collars are based on this design, you know? Same frequency protocols, same detonation mechanisms, but those collars are newer, cruder. These are the originals, the perfected models. I need to understand exactly how they achieve such reliability. Sierra Madre, that name again, the place they'd been developing the cloud. 4. The place where the hazmat suits were field tested. I realized then that everything they'd done to us, every experiment, every prototype, it had all been preparation for something bigger. The Sierra Madre was the end game, the place where all their technologies would come together. And Elijah was going to use our collars to enslave people there, just like we'd been enslaved here. He worked on my collar for 6 hours, didn't give me water, didn't let me rest, just kept adjusting frequencies, testing responses, documenting everything. When he finally released me, I could barely walk. My neck was burned from where he'd attached monitoring leads. My throat was raw from screaming when he'd tested pain thresholds. He didn't care. He'd gotten his data. That's all that mattered. The next day, he started assembling teams. He'd capture people from the wasteland, fit them with collars based on the Little Yangtze design, force them to work together on tasks he'd set, testing group dynamics, testing how the threat of mutual detonation affected cooperation, testing whether people would sacrifice each other to save themselves. All the research Big Mountain had started, Elijah was finishing. And we were his reference materials. I watched him prepare for months, watched him refine the collar technology, watched him practice on us until he could control every aspect of the detonation systems. He turned Little Yangtze into his personal laboratory, and we were his permanent test subjects. The government had abandoned us. Big Mountain had forgotten us. But Elijah had found us and found us useful. A woman came hunting him eventually. I saw her from a distance, setting up a sniper position in the ruined building north of the camp. She watched Elijah for days through a scope, waiting for the perfect shot. Brotherhood of Steel, I learned later, sent to kill him for crimes against the order. Her name was Christine. She was our only hope of escape. She took her shot on a Tuesday morning. I heard the rifle crack, saw Elijah dive for cover, thought maybe she'd succeeded, thought maybe our nightmare was finally over. Then, Elijah stood up, activated his remote, and sent us charging at her position, sent us running toward her with our collars armed, sent us as living bombs. I ran because the collar made me run. The signal overrode my control, forced my legs to move, pushed me toward Christine's building. I could see her face in the scope, could see her realize what was happening, could see her understand that killing us wouldn't stop us because Elijah would just detonate our collars anyway. She tried to retreat, tried to escape, but there were too many of us, too many human bombs charging her position. Elijah detonated prisoner 053 when he got within 10 meters of her. The explosion was massive. The shockwave knocked Christine unconscious, killed 2 more prisoners who were too close, gave Elijah exactly what he wanted. The robots came after that, collected Christine's body, dragged her away to the Y-17 medical facility for experiments that would break her mind just like they'd broken ours. Elijah left Little Yangtze after that, packed up his equipment, took his research notes, headed for the Sierra Madre to implement everything he'd learned. He left us behind, left us locked in our camp, left us with the knowledge that everything we'd suffered was about to be inflicted on a whole new group of victims. The collar technology we'd tested would enslave people at the casino. The cloud we'd almost been exposed to would trap them in the villa. The hazmat suits that became the ghost people would seal them in walking prisons, just like the trauma harnesses sealed corpses. Every horror Big Mountain had perfected on us was going to be weaponized against the entire Mojave wasteland. I am still here, still prisoner 0127, still wearing this collar, still locked in Little Yangtze 204 years after they first brought me here. The fence is degraded now, the gates are broken. Technically, I could leave, but the collar still works. The boundary is still coded. Step past the fence line and my head becomes pink mist. I've tested it. I've watched others test it. The technology never fails. Some wasteland traveler will find this place eventually. Maybe they already have. Maybe someone called the courier is out there right now, discovering the Sierra Madre, finding Elijah's plans, learning about the collars and the cloud and all the technologies that were born here in Little Yangtze. Maybe they'll come here looking for answers. Maybe they'll see us and understand what we represent. We are the blueprint. We are the proof of concept. We are the forgotten American atrocity that made every other atrocity possible. Every slave in Caesar's legion wearing a collar, that technology started here. Every controlled population in the NCR, those pacification systems were tested on us. Every horror in the wasteland that involves humans being treated as property, as resources, as expendable components in someone else's plans, it all traces back to Executive Order 99066 and what the United States government authorized its scientists to do to its own citizens in the name of national security. I've had 2 centuries to think about what happened to us. 2 centuries to understand the machinery of dehumanization, 2 centuries to realize that Little Yangtze wasn't an aberration. It was American policy working exactly as designed. They didn't round us up because we were actually spies. They rounded us up because fear is easier than justice, because suspicion is cheaper than investigation, because it's simpler to imprison an entire ethnic group than to actually identify real threats. Executive Order 99066 wasn't about national security. It was about control, about demonstrating that citizenship means nothing when the government decides you're inconvenient. The camps during World War II, the Japanese internment, people know about those. They teach them in schools, build memorials, offer apologies. But Little Yangtze, we don't exist in the history books. We were classified, redacted, erased, because acknowledging us means acknowledging that America didn't just detain people during the Sino-American War. It experimented on them, tortured them, turned them into human research materials for scientific projects that violated every ethical principle the country claimed to stand for. Big Mountain couldn't have operated without government approval. Those contracts General Wellesley signed, the coordination with Commander Devlin, the systematic arrests of educated Chinese Americans and political protesters, all of it required paperwork, required authorization, required people in Washington signing forms that said, yes, we agree to let scientists use American citizens as test subjects for weapons development and behavioral control research. Someone stamped those orders, someone approved the budget, someone decided our lives were worth less than the data our deaths would generate. I think about the scientists sometimes, Dr. Boros, Dr. Klein, the whole think tank, were they evil or were they just doing their jobs, following protocols, advancing their fields? They didn't see us as people, they saw us as resources. And once you convince yourself that certain humans aren't really human, there's no limit to what you can justify. That's not a big mountain problem. That's an America problem. That's a human problem. The capacity to classify other people as less than, as expendable, as acceptable losses, that's the technology that makes all the other horrors possible. The collar around my neck isn't just a physical device, it's a metaphor. It's every law, every policy, every system designed to control people by threatening them with violence. It's every time a government says we're doing this for your protection while actually doing it for power. It's every instance of authority deciding that some lives matter less than others. And the worst part? The collar works. It worked for 200 years. It'll probably work for 200 more. Because the technology of oppression is always more durable than the technology of liberation. I've watched the wasteland develop through the fence, seen traders pass by in the distance, seen NCR patrols, seen Legion scouts, seen all the new factions building their versions of civilization on the ashes of the old world. And you know what they all have in common? They all use collars. They all use control systems. They all found ways to make people into property. The Legion is most obvious about it, literal slavery, but the NCR does it too, subtler, taxes and laws and prison labor, different mechanisms, same principle, control through threat of violence. Big Mountain's research didn't die with the bombs, it evolved, it spread. Every faction in the Mojave uses some version of the technologies that were perfected on us. The think tank might be insane now, trapped in their robot bodies, barely remembering their own names, but their legacy lives on. Their research works. The proof is that I'm still wearing this collar and it still keeps me imprisoned, even though everyone who built it is dead. Prisoner 027 told me something before she died. Said she'd figured out why they never tried to remove the collars surgically. "It's not just an explosive," she whispered. "It's integrated, connected to our nervous systems. The shocks, the control signals, they've mapped our pain receptors so completely that the collar is part of us now. Removing it would kill us just as surely as detonating it. We're not wearing the collars anymore. We are the collars. We've become the technology they tested on us." She was right. I can feel it. The collar isn't separate from me. It's been here so long, sending signals into my nerves for so many years that my body has adapted around it. My neurons fire in response to its patterns. My stress responses are keyed to its frequencies. I'm not prisoner 0127 wearing a collar. I'm a collar that happens to have a ghoul attached. The experiment succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They didn't just control us, they merged us with the control mechanism, made us into living proof that humans can be transformed into tools. 4 other prisoners remain in Little Yangtze with me. We don't know each other's names anymore. Don't remember who we were before the numbers. We're just 0019, 076, 103, 144, and me. 5 ghouls wandering a dead camp, too broken to go feral, too stubborn to die, too afraid of the fence to leave. We're the last witnesses, the only proof that this place existed, that this happened, that America did this to its own people. Sometimes I imagine what would happen if someone disabled the fence, if someone shut down the collar system, if someone gave us the technical freedom to leave. Would we? Could we? After 200 years of imprisonment, would we even know how to be free? Or have we been broken so completely that we just stay here anyway, wandering the camp out of habit, following the routines that have defined our existence for longer than most civilizations last? I think we'd stay. I think the real prison isn't the fence or the collar. It's what they did to our minds. The learned helplessness, the conditioned obedience, the deep knowledge that we're not supposed to exist, not supposed to have rights, not supposed to matter. You can't remove that with wire cutters. You can't disable that with a frequency jammer. The psychological collar is permanent. The courier came through Big Mountain eventually. I heard about it from lobotomites who got close enough to the fence to make sounds at us. Someone from outside, someone who walked into the think tank and walked back out with their brains still in their head. Someone who might have even disabled the collar system, might have freed us. But they never came to Little Yangtze. Why would they? We're not a quest objective. We're not important to the main story. We're just ambient tragedy. Background lore, the kind of detail that makes a world feel deep but doesn't actually matter to the plot. That's what hurts most. Not the experiments, not the collars, not even the 200 years of imprisonment. It's the irrelevance. It's knowing that our suffering was so normalized, so systematized, so thoroughly documented that it became boring. Just another atrocity in a world full of atrocities. Just another group of victims in a system built on creating victims. We're not special. We're not unique. We're just the specific example of a universal principle. Power will always find ways to dehumanize the powerless, and it will always claim it's doing so for good reasons. I wonder what happened to my family, my mother, my father, my younger sister. Were they arrested too? Sent to different camps, used in different experiments? Or did they escape somehow, flee to somewhere the military didn't reach, survive the bombs and build new lives? I'll never know. The world ended before I could find out. And even if they survived, even if they're still out there as ghouls like me, I could walk past them on the street and neither of us would recognize each other. We're not the people we were. We're what the camps made us. We're what America made us. If this confession meant something to you, leave a like. It's the only way I know you liked the video. Because I need to believe someone heard this. Someone learned what happened here. Someone will remember that Little Yangtze existed, that we existed, that this wasn't just acceptable background noise in the march of progress. The technology they perfected on us is everywhere now. Every explosive collar in the Mojave, every pacification system, every method of control that treats humans as programmable machines. Father Elijah took it to the Sierra Madre and trapped people in a casino full of poison gas and hologram security. The Legion uses it on slaves. The NCR uses variations of it on prisoners. Every faction that rose from the ashes learned the lessons Big Mountain taught. People can be controlled through fear, through pain, through the constant threat of violence. And once you have the technology to make people obedient, you never give it up. We are the origin story that nobody wanted. We're the dark secret that explains why the wasteland is the way it is. Every cruelty you see out there, every system of oppression, every dehumanizing technology, it was prototyped here. On us, on American citizens who thought their papers meant something, who thought citizenship was protection, who thought their country wouldn't turn them into lab rats. The sun is setting again. Another day in Little Yangtze, another day of existence without purpose, another day of being a living memorial to forgotten atrocities. The collar hums against my throat. The fence stands sentinel. The camp slowly crumbles around me, and I remain. Prisoner 0127, the ghoul who won't die, the witness who can't speak, the proof that humanity's greatest crime isn't the evil we do, but the evil we forget. I am the concentration camp prisoner who survived everything except acknowledgement. I am the test subject who outlived the experiment. I am the number that used to be a name. I am the warning that history refuses to hear. I am what America does when nobody's watching. I am what we all are, underneath the lies we tell ourselves about civilization and progress and justice. I am Little Yangtze, and Little Yangtze is still here, still teaching the wasteland that the most American thing of all is building monuments to freedom while perfecting the technology of chains. The collar around my neck will outlast empires. The fence will stand longer than nations, and I will remain here. Prisoner 0127, waiting for someone to remember that before the bombs fell, before the world ended, before the wasteland was born, America built concentration camps, filled them with its own citizens, and called it national security. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is the truth they buried in classified files and erased from history books. We were here, we suffered, we mattered, even if nobody remembers, even if nobody cares. We were human once, before they taught us we weren't.